Like the recording thing. There it is.
Hi.
All right, and we are live. Hello, everyone. Jen Amos here, the the creator and co-host of the Filipino American Woman Project. Let me put some fancy schmancy banners down here, some call to actions and stuff. And as always, I have my incredible co-host with me, who's been with me for 110 plus episodes now, I think, at the time of this recording. And her whose delivery date is coming any day now. Nani Dominguez. Nani, welcome to our live show for the Pinay Poetry Slam.
Thank you. Thank you. So excited to be here.
Yeah, and I want to, if you can just share real briefly before we introduce our guests, our poets for today. This was actually your idea. This was your idea to put together this poetry slam. So, tell us a little bit about kind of how this came to mind for you to coordinate this, and more importantly, bring on our two guests for today.
Yeah. This is obviously only available to our Just with Jen and Nani membership, which is our new private podcast platform that we have been recently transitioning our focus and energy over into building. And what we really are aiming to do with this community here is to build on the community that we built through TIFA. One of the ways that we're doing that is by reconnecting with past guests and really highlighting, checking in with them to see where they're at now, and what kind of how their work has developed or how their lives have developed since we interviewed them on the TIFA project, and also dive into the work that they do today and what their contributions to the community are, because we feel like all of the projects that our guests work on, and all the ways that they're involved in the community just deserves so much more than an hour plus or minus episode on the podcast. So this is our way of just continuing to build community again on the community that we've already built, and really giving our past guests the platform to continue taking up space in this family that we've built.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you are joining us live, feel free to let us know. Quick shout out to Abigail, who says that she's so excited for this. Thank you for building community. We're so happy to have you and join us for our conversation or for our Panay Poetry Slam today. I actually came up with the title like last minute. I was like, oh, Panay Poetry Slam. It like goes together. But anyway, let me go ahead and bring on our poets here, starting with Justine Ramos. She wrote the book Hollow Hollow Poetry. And if you don't know about her, go ahead and go back to our show, tifaproject.com. We interviewed her back in episode 92. Just like what Nani had said, we are bringing back past guests to catch up with them, see what they're doing, and collaborate with them. And of course, if you want to reach out to her or add her right now on social media, go ahead and check her out on Instagram. But Justine, welcome to our Pinay Poetry Slam. Any opening words from you?
Hello, hello. I'm so excited to be here. All of these women in this podcast show right now inspire me and motivate me and just encourage me to write more about our community and just get inspired. So, love you all.
Yeah, awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us and agreeing to be a part of this. I know we've been talking in our group chat on Instagram to get this all together. So I just can't wait for our poetry slam for today. And of course, last but not least, we have Ashley Lanuza, who who wrote the book, or wrote the poetry book, My Heart of Rice, a Poetic Filipino American Experience. And if you want to know a little bit about her background, go ahead and check out her episode on our show, tforproject.com, episode 62. And of course, if you want to connect with her, go ahead and add her on Instagram right now. So without further ado, Ashley, welcome to our Pinay Poetry Slam. And let us know if you have any, and give us some opening thoughts to start off our conversation. I blah, like, I don't know. It's like a weird day for me. So I'm trying my best without like calling for Dennis to edit this. But Ashley, any opening thoughts?
Hi, so excited to be here this afternoon slash evening for y'all on the East Coast, and thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here with Tifa again and working with Justine, and I'm just excited, and like Justine said, continuously inspired by everyone in this room.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we're so happy to have you all here today. Looks like we have some more people commenting. Vanessa says, yes, yes, girl.
Hey, Vanessa.
And then we also have another Justine joining us, the cutest Justine I know. Awesome. Well, thank you all for being here, and please continue to comment. Let us know that you're here. Let us know if you're enjoying this Pinay Poetry Slam for today. So, Nani, any other thoughts that you want to add about Ashley and Justine before I kind of give the reins to Ashley, because Ashley has put together this whole agenda for us. But any thoughts from you before I transfer it over to Ashley?
Yeah, no, I'm just really excited to, turn it over to both Justine and Ashley to host this event today, because I am just in such awe of both of them for the work that they've done on their own poetry books, and having them both published on Amazon and all the other places people buy books. I don't know, I still buy books just on Amazon, but I'm sure they're available many other places as well. And yeah, I've read both of their work, and I think I was even one of the what do you call it, Justine? The people that leave the comments on the printed version of your book.
A beta reader.
A beta reader. Thank you. So yeah, I am very much invested in both of their projects, and just remembering back to our interviews with both of them, we had really great conversations that really stuck with me. So I'm just happy to be back in shared space with them again. And again, let's get into it.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Well, Ashley, you can take it from here. Nani and I are just going to kind of be in the background and maybe interrupt every now and then, but go ahead and take it away.
Yeah, thanks so much for the intro, Jen and Nani. So excited to see y'all this afternoon / evening. And so Justine and I are going to be sharing a few poems from our respective books, and kind of seeing how, these different themes of like history and identity and understanding of the immigrant experience kind of tie into our lives, no matter how different they are. And so with no further ado, Justine with her first poem for tonight's episode.
Hello. So the first poem that I'm going to be reading today is called Ferdinand Magellan. It's actually the first poem of my book, and it was recently reviewed by a blogger who was really moved and inspired by it. And I was really shocked to see how similar of an experience that this piece of history is for a lot of Filipinos and Filipino Americans. So without further ado, this is Ferdinand Magellan. The teacher says, Ferdinand Magellan led the first expedition to circumnavigate the globe. He couldn't finish it because he was killed by savages in the Philippines. Then, eyes burn holes through my spine. The flame flickers between each foramen, carves shame across my skin. I don't look up. I don't look back. Instead, I rub my thumb across a map of a familiar archipelago, a 3x3 picture under the portrait of Magellan, back and forth as if the strokes of my finger could teleport me back home, where I can feel the cool mush of rice fields under my feet, grains of salty sand and sea between my toes, as if I could float along the Santa Maria River on my back, extinguishing the flames that simmer my bones, ignited by the arsonists in my classroom who keep pulling the trigger on their flamethrower eyes, screaming, "You did this." The teacher holds me hostage under his gaze. Can you tell us more about Lapu-Lapu? The flames turn into ice, and suddenly I have brain freeze. My voice is stuck in an ice cube I cannot swallow down. I look at a 2x2 picture of a man half clothed, holding a campilan, a man who looks like my family, but alas, a man who I don't know. I shake my head. I don't look up. I don't look back. Somehow, this is worse than the flames, not knowing who your people are or how to defend them from arsonists who keep burning pages of my culture's history that I didn't get to read, pages that nobody will get to read, pages turned into ash, turned into ink to write a history book like this. written by some man who doesn't look like my family, some man who I don't know, some man nobody in the archipelago seems to know, some man who has probably never stepped foot in mushy rice fields or dipped their toes in our warm, salty oceans and sands, who doesn't know how it feels for the sun to toast his stomach while floating on the Santa Maria River, some man who shrunk portraits of your heroes in minuscule flashcards, printed with the very ink made from the ashes of my history. I rub my thumb across the pictures over and over, as if they'll come alive and tell me who they are, how they've been, what their truth is, how to defend them, how to grow a spine, and how to melt my ice cube voice into liquid honey and put out the flames in my back, but I stay frozen in place. My spine slowly cremates against the fire. I don't look up. I don't look back. This is how it feels to not know my history, to not know myself. Thank you.
Woo! Wow, that was heavy. That was heavy. Break it down for us, for people that are hearing that for the first time. I mean, gosh, there's just so much to that. But I guess if you can kind of explain the primary goal, the main message you want to give for that poem.
Yeah, so that poem is, I guess, one of the most personal experiences for me, or I guess one of the first awakenings that I had as a non-white person. I never, I guess in childhood, you never feel different, right? Because you're a kid, you know, you think everyone's kind of the same. We all look kind of different, but we're underneath all the same, right? But that was the first time where I realized, oh no, I am a different person. I come from a different place. I am an immigrant. I don't know, you know, the people around me are not accepting of me, and I never saw Filipino history or Filipino people represented in education or academia and the media or anything at all. This was the first instance where I had that kind of representation, but in that was a negative kind of portrayal of my people, of my history. And it was unfortunate that that was one of my only first introductions of Filipino history in an American education system. So that kind of just shows how our history is being left out of American history books, and how we are not represented, and how it's so important for Filipino children, Filipino kids, teenagers, to be able to see themselves represented in a way that is empowering and inspirational, instead of, you know, being of our characters being sabotaged. So yeah.
Love it. Got a couple of comments here. Vanessa was following along in her book. So thank you, Vanessa, for doing that. And Abigail has a lot of comments. She says, this is so powerful, incredible, such a start. And also Isabel says, love this. And Vanessa says 100%. And also hashtag representation matters. Thank you, everyone, for engaging with us. Please keep the comments coming along. Nani, I want to check in with you, see if you had any thoughts on what Justine had shared in unpacking her poem.
Yeah, I love how expressive you were, first of all, specifically about the kind of somatic reaction that you have in your body as you're having this realization, as you're learning these facts, and understanding also that the education you're receiving, in the classroom is like not a necessarily accurate depiction of our actual history, and how there are other figures like Lapu Lapu who should be getting the page in this book, for example. And I like how you keep bringing it back to the hot and cold sensations. I think that that's really relatable and really just descriptive of the way that we all feel as we're like navigating through this confusion of learning our own identities and learning how our history has been erased, because that's a big concept to grasp, when you're first introduced to it. So I appreciate you kind of simplifying it in the way of, in the sense of like the somatic feeling that you have.
Awesome. And Ashley, knowing that you had coordinated pretty much their setup today, any thoughts you want to share about Justine's poem?
Yeah, absolutely. And I also had the opportunity to read Justine's poem also as a beta reader, and I just have to say, like, the detail in it is just so beautiful. The poetic piece about like how you want to melt into honey and like just like say what you need to say is just really strong. And I think so many of us have felt that way, not only in the situation of like the classroom, but also just trying to empower ourselves and trying to really be there for ourselves and show up for ourselves when people are trying to somehow backhand or diminish us in some way. And so it not only is a feeling that is that in Justine's experience in her past, but experience for present for so many of us, I think. So it's really great.
Yeah. Well, Justine, well done.
Thank you both. It hit me in the heart.
Don't cry. No, I'm kidding. I'm just kidding. No, we should cry. This is a show where you can cry.
Do cry, yes.
Yeah,
it's
just
Hannah
cry.
season.
Yes, no, I love it. I love it. That's awful. I can't believe I said don't cry. I'm sorry. Like, I take that back.
Please cry.
No, it's
Please
powerful. And I'm sure it's great to get this immediate feedback, even, just from your poem. So awesome. Well, let's go ahead and popcorn it back to Ashley. And Ashley, I believe it's your turn.
Yeah, for sure. So this poem is an intro poem for one of my chapters called Forgotten Histories. And I kind of see it as where we see, the experience of Justine and going through a history, like a moment in her life where this history is like represented to her. And then how does one, deal or kind of process that, right? This poem kind of showcases having all that history and that knowledge there, and then where do we go from here? So doesn't really have a title, so I'll just start. I stuck to the mantra, no history to no self, and no history means no self. So I dug through a past, not by ancestral linkage, but by skin color and language and visage, and a common national denominator, in spite of separations spanning centuries and distances. I imagined their struggles, conflicts, tribulations, triumphs, happiness, satisfactions, in a history not written in textbooks, but found hidden in articles, tucked away novels, never opened presentations, hoping to find a semblance of understanding, rewriting my definitions. That's it.
Short and sweet. Love it.
Yeah.
We are done.
We're done.
No. Beautiful. Nani, any thoughts?
Yeah,
Or questions?
No questions. I like how, it's kind of piggybacking off of Justine's, what Justine first shared, and how you kind of find ways around that in terms of education, if you're really interested, which it seems like, all the people in this community, at least, have experienced that, like, oh, well, I want to know more. And I recognize now that what I can learn in school or in a textbook is very limited. So where are these hidden away, tucked away resources that I can find to learn about myself and to, evolve my identity and learn how to reconnect with my Filipinx roots. And so that's a huge part of the process. And I think that that's where we all need more resources like both of yours to be able to learn about our own histories, because that's essentially what both of your books are, right? Are resources for us to learn about ourselves. And again, just so appreciative for you both making it so accessible to our community. So I love how you really brought that back full circle.
Yeah. And I'm just curious to know from an artistic standpoint, like, how do you know when to, and this, I feel like this sounds like a very basic question, or I don't even know if you can answer it, but like, how do you know when a poem should be short or long? Like how did you kind of decide for this one, it was going to be short and sweet?
Yeah. So this one started off a chapter like that kind of transitioned the sentiment of my book. So my book really starts personal. It starts with like family. It starts with kind of understanding my upbringing. I was raised by mostly a Filipino family, but there was like some other ethnic cultures that had an effect on me. And so it was not until college when I was able to learn about history, like Filipino American history specifically, and that I really resonated with. And so it was short because it acted as a transition between this like blind, not knowing what Filipino American history or identity really means, and then transitioning into that because I'm learning so much from my college peers and the organizations I kept in touch with.
Yeah. Wow, that's incredible. Justine, I just thought I'd check in with you, see if there's anything you wanted to say about Ashley's poem.
Yeah, that I love this poem, but it even though Ashley has ASMR, calm, soothing vibe voice,
She does.
she really does. She really does.
I'm like, you need an app or something where you like read
Yeah, I was
meditations or something.
I was like Zooming with her. I don't know when was this, but I was like, I wasn't even listening to anything what she was saying. I was like, wow, you have like a really nice voice.
I remember that.
But besides that, it really, it's amazing that we have these resources, but it angers me that we have to dig to find them. And it's
Right.
usually not available, like Ashley said, until the university or college level, if your university has a strong or prominent and united Filipino organization that is very much on advocating for Filipino studies classes and organizations and fostering that education. But it's still so inaccessible to a lot of our youth, our adolescents, and even a lot of college students, Filipino college students who may not be in a college where there are many Filipinos. So, I got mixed feelings of, yes, like we have these resources, but man, I wish more people knew about them. And that goes with that phrase, closed books, right? Because they're there. But how do we know if they're there if nobody shows them to us, if nobody pulls them out for us?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow, that's powerful. Yeah, that reminds me of even my experience in college. Like it only took me till college to finally take a Filipino American history class, and I remember when I finally took the class, and I was aware of it. Like it was actually really hard for me to really like pay attention to the facts and figures. Like it was actually like just kind of hard to grasp the fact that this course was available. And then I remember in the upcoming semesters, the course ended up being canceled because, there wasn't enough students interested in it or there wasn't enough funding or what have you. But, if you're lucky, just like what you said, Justine, like if your school actually has a strong support for that, for Filipino history, Filipino American history, then you're very fortunate. But otherwise, it is a treasure hunt. It is about digging around to find these. And once you find them, it's so amazing. But you're like, man, like, why did I have to dig so hard, to find this? Why can't we make it? Why can't that just be more accessible? And that reminds me of part of why, we do what we do here at the Tifa Project is we just want to make more of our oral history accessible to the average person, whether you go to college or not. And so, just kudos to all of us, for being able to create the work that we do to continue to amplify our stories here. And we got a comment from Abigail. She says, we definitely do have to dig. It's so frustrating, but I love how both of your guys' poetry unpacks that. So well done, ladies. Awesome. All right, Ashley, if you want to go ahead to the next part.
Justine.
Yeah, there you go.
All right, so I'm going to start with the July poems. It's very fitting. July. It is July today, July this month. It's also my birthday month, but it's also...
Oh, happy birthday.
Thank you.
Yeah, happy birthday. I didn't know that. Everyone wish Justine a happy birthday this month.
Thank you.
Okay.
July 21st. My cancers
Oh my gosh.
rise or
Next
cry.
week.
Love it. Well, happy early birthday.
Yes.
Thank you. But I also think that July is so significant in that so many things happened in that month in American history and Filipino history, and surprisingly all around the same time. There are a lot of... July 4th is so significant, not just because of July 4th, 1776, but a lot more July 4th. So, and I'm going to give you these dates. So we'll start off with 4 July 1776. Give me liberty or give me death. Wave that banner and play the songs of freedom. This land is not your land. This land is my land. Red splatters in the air after the lash of a whip. The birth of our nation is painted white to mask black lips that turn blue. How does it feel to live in the land of the free? Sing, this land's made for you, not me. The next July poem is for July 1902. Freedom can be bought with the price of a luxury yacht. Surrender the brown to the white. Hold their necks, paint their faces red, pinch their jugulars until their lips turn blue. Convince them their irises should be the same shade too. Refuse to acknowledge defeat, because brown can never stand alone unless it's 200,000 brown bodies laying cold and limp in their own homes. A genocide in April. Imperial mission complete. A celebration in July. You're no longer free. This is for July 1946. If we cannot have your land, we'll force you to remember it was once ours. We'll exit your building but keep one foot in the door, stretching our toes inside military bases, digging our heels in metal bullets and packing gunpowder beneath our nails. Kick the backs of Filipino children so hard they forget their native language. Feed them spoonfuls of alphabet soup sourced from the American English Dictionary. Tell them they are independent but cannot survive without us. Call it Filipino-American Friendship Day. Maybe they'll forget about the war. Maybe they'll forget about the 200,000 and who they should be fighting for. And this is 3 July 2020. Hypocrisy is when the day that commemorates the silence of voices and imprisonment of justice comes right before the day that commemorates revolution. Irony is when a country nourished with the blood of warriors and activists who resisted and fought against the weeds of colonization becomes afraid of its own roots. An oxymoron is when the word anti-terror is engraved next to pages swearing to murder those who resist war criminals who sleep peacefully under pristine ivory houses built with the bones of people with slit throats and ghost voices, and those who bathe comfortably in the blood of those they swore to protect. Thank you. That is the end of the July poems.
Wow. I feel like freedom doesn't mean freedom in the way that most people think freedom when I hear your poems.
Thank you. Yeah. It's freedom is such a nuanced word nowadays because now freedom in the context of America is freedom to the select few, right? So who was free on July 4th, 1776? Certainly wasn't anyone of color. So, yeah. So I could explain maybe about what these dates mean, just so people have a little context of it. In the book, it has footnotes referencing like what the dates mean. So for July 1776, of course, we just had it. It is American Independence Day. And this poem really just highlights what July 4th means to those who were not free during that time. And I took a spin off of a lot of patriotic songs that I sang during elementary school, that, you know, during like the July months, people would sing these songs and play them during fireworks. And now with the context of activism and justice and equity and diversity, it's so weird listening to these songs. It just has a totally different meaning to me now. And of course, like I wrote this book during the whole Black Lives Matter movement, which is still going on. But at the peak of it, that was the context of it. For July 1902 is when the Philippines was bought for $20 million by the United States from Spain on July 4th, 1902. So this story is a little ironic and hypocritical, because during the Spanish and Filipino War, the U.S. was actually aiding the Philippines and helping them to gain independence and freedom from Spain. And once the Philippines won against the war from Spain, the U.S. kind of turned their backs and slid $20 million under the contract and took the Philippines for themselves. So when people say, you know, freedom again, the context of freedom on July 4th, how is it possible that, you know, you're celebrating your nation for being free from another nation, but also taking away another nation's freedom and in fact buying it for a price of a luxury yacht? And the 200,000 refers to the deaths of the Filipinos during that war. 4 July 1946 is the day the United States formally recognized the independence of the Republic of the Philippines. And I thought that was interesting because, again, very ironic, very hypocritical, because they chose to match their Independence Day with Filipino Independence Day. And not only that, they had the audacity to be the ones to declare, hey, now you're free. You know, as if they had the power, they had the control. They were the only ones who had to say to whether or not this whole country and all its people were free. And I also took a little bit more, I guess, hints of the neo-colonization and how even though the Philippines is not, you know, under United States rule, there's still military bases in the Philippines from the United States. There is a lot of ties, and I think policy is heavily influenced by what America wants and needs from the Philippines. And that goes from controlling their education system, you know, enforcing children in the Philippines to know English and require them to sometimes to not speak Tagalog in schools. So yeah. And 3 July 2020 is the day Philippine President Rodrigo Duterte signed the anti-terror law. And I just thought, again, the day that commemorates freedom comes before the day that commemorates violence and fear. So that July 4th, July 3rd dates are very significant to me. And I'm seeing this very strange pattern of hypocrisy and again, irony in the words freedom and what justice means and in the context of Filipino history and American history and their ties. So, yeah.
Man, I want to get Nani's thoughts. Sorry, I'm like totally like facilitating this, even though I didn't say. I'm like so used to doing this. Give me 1 second. I just want to give a shout out to Anne. Anne had said, "Freedom depends on who gets to tell the story." Very true. And then Abigail is just sharing how much in agreement she is with what we've been talking about so far. So Nani was not nodding her head a lot, and so I just thought check in with you, get your thoughts.
Yeah, no, I love how you really dissect your interpretation of the word freedom and all the different kind of sources of inspiration that even inspired you to compare all these different dates and kind of what those interpretations that you have are. And also, obviously, the timeline, the history timeline that goes behind each of the dates and how you make learning about our history so poetic, for lack of a better word, obviously, because it is a poem. But learning, you know, doesn't have to be in the form of like a boring textbook always. It's like can be artful. And I think that that's one really big takeaway that kind of a point of why we're doing this event is to kind of highlight that and to really appreciate the artful ways that you have made that information accessible. And also for the different perspectives that you paint throughout these poems in the context of, you know, an American independence celebration, if you will.
I'm going to go ahead and check in with Ashley, and I'm going to try to not facilitate. So if you need me, you just say Jen.
Oh,
But Ashley, go ahead. I want to very curious to get your thoughts as well with Justine's poem.
yeah, I never realized how many significant moments or events were in July. And so this is a great example of continuing to learn about things that you're never taught, and you know what the impact is. And yeah, I think, you know, I agree with Nani. Like, it's a great, like, I think poetry is such a great way to just deliver hard facts and events and information, because you do it in a really digestible way, similar to how you would do, like, you know, movies or like TV shows. It's just really artistic, but underlying it is so much research. And it's like one of those things where, what does this mean? Let me Google more about it, learn more about it. And it's really empowering, right, to have that information on hand. And so it was great. The juxtaposition of all of the July dates were great. Like, they're all in, you know, a certain order, like chronological order, but again, still highlighting, like you said, Justine, the hypocrisy and like just the damage it's done to so much of our ancestors, and the like the generational trauma that's been passed down since. Yeah.
Yeah, I think now there's such a fear of the word activist or revolution in the Philippines, and a lot of that has to do with the anti-terror law, where, you know, a lot of activists were redlined. And I just found that so ironic, because I keep using that word, but that's really all that I could think of,
It's ironic.
because our country was really founded on revolutionaries and activists who believed in the independence and sovereignty of our nation, and now we're straying away from it because of fear.
Yeah.
So yeah.
That also, I just throw in one last comment that I had that I forgot to add to my commentary, but I don't know if anyone here has seen the what you call it, series on Netflix called How to Become a Tyrant. It's interesting. You should watch it. And just listening to that compilation of July poems really was resonating. What I was watching it last night, and it's an interesting way for, kind of, at first I was like, oh, so they're describing the stories of Adolf Hitler and Saddam Hussein, and you know, a lot of the ways in which they describe how they come into power and hold on to that power also remind me of leaders like Duterte, and instilling things like the anti-terror law. So I like how you also made that connection as well. And if you haven't seen that show, you should watch it. It's funny. I mean, it's not funny, it's horrible, but
Oh, awesome. Jen, do you have any thoughts on Justine sharing?
Yeah. Well, thank you for asking me a question and everything, and not having me facilitate this, because that's very addicting for me to do that. I no, I mean, I think for me, it's just like you said. I think the word, just kind of piggybacking off what you said, Justine, is just that irony. Um, you know, I think that I think you were the one that talked about this when you were with us back in episode 92. But you said that, for example, the kids in the Philippines are learning their alphabet. Like, let's say A is for apple, except that apples don't grow in the Philippines, you know? So I just feel like there's sort of this constant like gaslighting toward us in regards of like who we are and what our identity is, and like what's true and like what's not true. And you know, I think that happens on purpose, so that we do obey, or that we do, you know, submit to whatever the dominant you know, force says, or what have you. And so I think this whole time I feel like twisted inside in a way. It feels bittersweet. It makes me angry. I have mixed feelings about our history and the lack of it. But when you know it, how angry, you know, I think it makes us feel. But more importantly, how grateful I am, you know, for people such as you and Ashley to be able to take this history and put it into art form, like Nani said. Because going back to my semester trying to learn Filipino American history, that was just, you know, on print, like it was hard for me to digest. And so through oral history and through art such as this, um, I feel more connected to our history because I can feel it emotionally. I can feel the struggle of our people in your art and in your writing. So that's what I wanted to add, Ashley. So back to you.
Thank you so much. So speaking of, resonating with, the figures in history and like kind of condensing that into a specific art form, I'm going to transition to my section of poems called the good, the bad, and the American dream. And in this one, I kind of go in the perspective of a farm worker in the Central Valley of California area. In the 1920s, there was a flux of immigration from those in the Philippines to do farm work, and there was you have like Little Manila and Stockton as a remnant of that. Unfortunately, it's under reconstruction. It's a really complicated history with there too, because there was a freeway that was built there, I believe in the 60s, and then they're now just trying to reclaim their spot in Stockton. But aside from that, the historical part of it is there was a flux of farm workers there, and I kind of imagine myself in the perspective of a day's end of the day, a farm worker, Filipino farm worker in California, in a place that isn't as welcoming as he was taught for it to be. So, the good. Music blasts from the sharply tuned band, and I throw a week's earnings to greedy fingers, and I grab this woman's smooth fingers into my callous palms. Her skin is milky white to my caramel brown, and I hold her tall stature and caress her blonde hair, and I look into her blue eyes, trying to find myself, and I cannot find me. But this is all I have for romance. The bad. And I step into the crisp air of midnight, and knuckles grab the lapel of my suit, and my fingers slip from the door, and my head pounds on the black cement, and I hold my breath. And their masculine bodies pounce on me like lions attacking prey, and their milky white bodies kick mine until my caramel skin paints the pavement red, and the crunch of my bones, the slaps on my skin, break me like the pieces of my already fractured spirit. Go back to where you came from, blends with the sound of crackling cartilage, and I scream in silence because no one wants to hear me. And the American dream. El Dorado Street is not lined with golden opportunity or the dream I chased. This world beat me to a pulp, slashed my wrists and buckled my knees, disbanded me from my brothers, raped me of my innocence, forced me into bed with blood, lust, fear, and shame. The blue and red lights threatened me, the suspect of my undoing. Imprisonment for simply existing, trapped by an illusion that America is in the heart, when the truth is, pain is in the being. So just to break that one down a little bit, so Carlos Bulosan published America is in the Heart, kind of, encompassing his experience as a Filipino-American migrant and farm worker in the Central Valley of California and like the West Coast and Hawaii. And he talks about just these anecdotes where you would go into taxi dance halls and Filipino women didn't really migrate with the men because of other political laws that the American government imposed with immigration. And so you would go into these taxi dance halls, pay like a few pennies, days worth of work just to dance with a white woman or sometimes a Hispanic woman for a dance or two. And while that's going on, there was also discrimination against typically like white men in the town of Stockton, and there was this whole kind of informal rule where like if you were non-white, you had to walk on one side of the street, and just a lot of discrimination there. And so in the second poem, The Bad, after he dances with the woman, he's faced with a lot of violence and being beat. And then in the last poem, kind of just encompassing that this idea of the American dream, as we already probably know, is very broken. And it's just not an idea that really exists anymore. And it was never really an idea to exist in the first place. Mm-hmm. So our character kind of walks through that. And a lot of the inspiration does come from America is in the Heart, because there was not only those anecdotes at the taxi dance halls or being, beat up by, just white passerbys on the street, being pulled over by policemen unjustly, which, something we see today. And also having to, kind of spend your money away gambling or going to brothels or, doing things that not, that you just left with doing because that's the money that you have and that's the place that you're in. And that's what, a lot of our first wave of farm working immigrants had to go through at the time. So.
Yeah, the farm workers movement. So that's the Manongs, I think, is how they refer to that. And I really appreciate you like putting yourself in their shoes, and really depicting a day in the life or kind of a snapshot of a moment in those experiences that they had. I remember when I was reading about that part of history and learning about it, how much it reminded me. My parents are not from, the 1920s generation. They're much younger than that, but it did get me to think about, it introduced me to the I don't know how to say that word, misgeneration laws. I don't know how you pronounce that word, but basically
Miscegenation, right?
That. Yes, that. You all know what I mean. Someone can Google it and put it in the chat. But where basically white women were not allowed to marry Black or brown men, including Filipinos. And that makes me think a lot about my own family because I am mixed, and my mom is white and my dad is Filipino. And so even though they weren't from that generation, it does get me to think about their experience and kind of where maybe that original attraction even came from. Not that, they were even aware or would say that that's part of their experience, but whether or not they are in tune with that, it's a part of their history. Yeah. So I do appreciate you kind of, again, putting yourself in their shoes and kind of giving us a snapshot of what that kind of life was like. It also makes me think about another podcast I was recently listening to that said the idea of America being a melting pot is essentially sending a message that, we have all these different cultures and different communities that live here and exist here, but they're not allowed to, or they're not expected to kind of show who they are and embrace who they are. We're expected to assimilate and become American, which is kind of, again, ironic when you think about the Manongs in the 1920s who were placed in these positions to where the only real entertainment or fun they could have was going to these dance halls, yet they weren't allowed to interact with the women. So it's like, what do you want me to do here? And then I walk outside and get jumped. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think salad bowl is the better metaphor if there were to be a metaphor, because melting pot it connotates like I have to erase everything in myself to blend into whatever color this melting pot soup.
Exactly.
So salad bowl is probably the better way to phrase it, and I've always gone with that one. But yeah, I think that just made me think of like how much I love the city I grew up in. I'm Los Angeles, and like it just makes me think of like I had a conversation with someone from the Bay Area actually, and they were asking me like, why do you like Los Angeles? And I was like, I don't know, like you kind of know where everything is, like where like these, okay, slightly problematic here because it's all about redlining and districting and everything like that historical of why certain neighborhoods are where they are, but the kind of positive spin to it is that how these communities have evolved into like these like ethnic enclaves within the city that you like know where to get like really good Korean food or like really good like soul food, and it's like, and I feel like that does encompass how like America kind of should function. It's like everybody is within the places that they feel comfortable with, but still like easy access, blending in together while still retaining their identity and their cultural roots. So it just made me think about that too. Yeah.
I want to quickly, if you don't mind me interrupting, Okay, so a couple comments here that we got from people. So Vanessa here says, I absolutely loved Halo Halo and My Heart of Rice this year. I've tried to make intentional efforts in reading more Filipino literature, and literature has been my way of connecting the dots for my heritage. Thank you so much for sharing this with us. Thank you, Vanessa, and thank you for continuing to engage with us in the comments here. And just other people being able to relate, such as Justine. And I think she's trying to help us also pronounce this. So anti
Yes.
Thank you, Justine. I still don't know how to say it, but that is how you spell it. Yes.
Yes. In case anyone wants to look it up, and I'm not going to try as well, but Ashley pronounced it earlier. So Ashley, just to help out Nani and I, can you pronounce it again?
Anti-miscegenation.
Perfect.
I'm not saying that
Perfect.
confidently. Let's go.
Anti-miscegenation. Anti-miscegenation.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna. I
Well,
tried.
thanks to
I tried.
Justine, we all know what I meant now.
Yeah, no, for sure. But thank you again. Thank you for sharing that poem. Ashley, it just gets me to think about, like, it's weird because there's a part of my own history about my grandpa, my dad's dad, that I don't know about. Like, I knew, and he had already, like, passed by the time I think my mom and dad got married. But I found out like a small little detail that my grandpa used to be a farm worker and was in California, and I think he was there in the early 1900s. But when I talked to my mom about it, because again, she didn't meet him when my dad had met, I was like, well, what do you know about him? Like, and she's like, that's all I know. That's all I know. He was a farmer. He was in California. So, it's nice to, like, if that's true, if he was around that time, it's kind of comforting. And also, like, again, I feel this tightness in my chest, in a sense, like this pain that I feel for just the things that they had experienced at that time. And not and it just seemed so restricted to have fun, and it just seemed like you were getting attacked left and right, in a sense, and you're just here trying to work and trying to do your job, and trying to assimilate. And it gets me to really appreciate the generations that came here before us, like especially the farm workers back in the early 1900s. So anyway, that's just what I wanted to add. I'm gonna sit here in the background again.
Thank you, Jen.
You're welcome.
Justine, if you have any commentary.
Yeah. So fun fact: me and Ashley actually grew up in the same neighborhood in Northeast LA. Yeah.
Oh yeah, we found
Eagle
out, and we also moved around the same time to generally the same place. It was so
Yeah.
bizarre. We figured that
Yeah.
Oh
out.
my gosh.
So
Yeah.
funny.
And you both, like, we didn't mention this yet, but you both worked with the same publishing company.
Yeah.
So your books.
University.
Yeah. We went to the
So
same
you-
university.
We know each other really well.
Yeah. So you two, like, have to be best friends now.
I
Yeah,
love that
yeah.
because when we decided to reach out to both of you to put this event together, I didn't even know, like, if you guys knew each other or if you guys had talked before or if you followed each other on Instagram even. So I love to find out that you have like that you're way more connected than we thought we were, like, connecting you through this event.
Yeah, you have no idea. Ashley has been like such a resource to me because she went through the publishing process first and then worked in the publishing process right currently. So she's just been amazing. And also our paths have been strangely aligned but have never crossed exactly until like
We
late
like
college.
continuously lived like 10 minutes away from each other, I think.
Yeah.
Until college.
Yeah. But yeah, the cultural enclaves of California and Los Angeles in general is something I miss most now that I'm in Boston, kind of Medford area. Um, there's not a lot of I always forget that there's not a lot of diversity in other places of the United States. And like I walk out and I'm like, where are my people? It's so like there's no the nearest Jollibee is a day walk away from here. So
Wow.
it's in New York, so I have to go all the way there to get Jollibee. Yeah, I don't have like Filipinos grocery stores to cook my food. I have to ask my mom to send it to me from Los Angeles and ship it to me here, part of my like care packages. So the cultural enclaves that Ashley highlights throughout her book are just so interesting and important, and it just hits right in the heart for me because I grew up in a in a primarily like Latino Hispanic community, and so did Ashley. And I didn't really get to find my own Filipino community until college, even though I did live in Eagle Rock, which was primarily Filipino. But people, I guess, like my age, who are Filipino, I didn't get to meet them until college. So yeah, love it.
Yeah,
Well,
I thought I'd add something about the East Coast, like having been here for 3 years now myself, and we have an upcoming interview coming out on the Tifa Project with a local friend of mine here in Virginia Beach, and it was interesting interviewing her because she was born and raised here, and she was telling us about how it's actually very rare to find a third generation Filipino American out here. It's mainly the first wave, the second wave, but to have someone who is just like completely Americanized and like 2 degrees away in a sense from someone who has an accent is very rare out here. Even though in Virginia Beach it is a military town, there definitely are little enclaves, I think, of Filipino communities that I still have to discover. But for the most part, it is interesting to think about um, how how there's little representation out here, and I'm sure there's a whole history lesson in itself, to understand why more of us are in California, let's say, versus out here in the East Coast. But either way, there are East Coast Filipinos out here. I have met a number of them. They exist, y'all. But anyway, that's just what I wanted to add. And yeah.
I also want to like recognize though that there is like a group of Filipinos in like the Louisiana area that have been there for like forever, and they don't really consider themselves like through a documentary I saw did not consider themselves Filipino anymore because they're like fifth, sixth generation or way down the line because there were settlements there in the 1700s. And so it's just really fascinating, like when you uncover just like little pockets of like, oh wow, I did not know this. Because when you're in California, it's like, oh, Filipinos are like everywhere, but
Yes, we're all definitely spoiled being from California.
NorCal and SoCal, but yeah, it's really fascinating that there is like, way deep generations that are just, there. So.
Yeah, for sure. One thing we have found lately in some of our interviews is there's a huge Filipino community in Florida. There's different pockets, different cities there. Yeah, so we have an upcoming guest that I won't share yet, who's been born, raised, and is continuously involved in her community locally. And yeah, I kind of feel like at least the people I've met here, the Filipinos I've met here, I feel like the two common places they always talk about is Virginia and Florida. Like they want to go down to Florida for the weather. Like I feel like Florida is like their California to us, just nice weather, sunny weather, the water, the beach kind of thing. That's my theory. But anyone in the East Coast that has lived out here longer than me, 3+ years, go ahead and correct me. I'd love to hear your perspective on this. All right. Well, other than that, that's all I want to add. So Ashley, if you want to continue with our agenda.
Yes, thank you, Jen. So Justine's going to be reading a poem, and then I'll be reading after her again. Just to note, mine's is super short, so it has a funny anecdote behind it. So take it away, Justine.
So this next section, we went from like talking about history. Now was sort of more like the immigration part. I'm a first generation immigrant. I moved here when I was a kid, and I kind of grew up with a heavy accent, with trying to adjust and talk to my peers, and learning how to not eat with your hands when you're at school, and developing that light switch between myself, inside myself, in transitioning to America. And this kind of highlights the immigrant experience, and I hope that this poem resonates with a lot of my fellow first generation, second generation immigrants. And it's called Hirap Buhay America, and it translates to Life is Hard in America. Clouds of frozen breath linger in the air and whisk away with the smog at the tail of a metro bus. My 4-year-old lungs pinch me, reminding me to stop exhaling before I pass out. But I am too fascinated with my ability to create clouds with my mouth in the national freezer called America. In the Philippines, freezers and fridges are a delicacy, a privilege only known to families who are lucky enough to have a surplus of food for the next day. Here, I'm encapsulated in a world of magical ice boxes and endless ACs that make my breath stand against gravity. Maybe this is why they say living in America is paradise. A privilege you forget exists the longer you are stored in this frozen wasteland that holds your identity hostage in midair, soaking in the scarcity of goosebumps and shivers while your family back home is drenched in the sweat of the sun. Sarap ng buhay sa Amerika, no? Life is good in America, huh? Titos and titas chuckle as our 30-minute calling card ticks against the clock that seems to go by faster in America. There's never enough time in America. No time to wake up to a bed of fresh kanin, rice. No time to gossip with your neighbors, much less know their names. No time to not work so we can survive another day in this endless tundra of frostbite and freezer burns you're supposed to be grateful for and appreciate, even though your skin yearns to sleep in a pillow of tropical humidity and bask in the golden rays of the Philippine sun. But for now, I wait for an air-conditioned bus that has sped away, leaving me in its trail of cloudy smog and frozen sighs with screams of home trapped in every crystal. The bus stop says 5:30. It is only 5:20. There's never enough time in America, never fast enough to catch up in America. You cannot hang on the tail end of a jeepney or yell habol habol, chase chase to the drivers in America. You must wait in the cold. Watch your breath stretch its arms across the Pacific, and when your titos and titas call, sarap ng buhay sa Amerika, no? Bite your tongue from saying, hirap buhay Amerika. Life is hard in America.
Wow.
Yay. Thank you.
Oh, snaps. I can't snap, but yes. All the
I'm
snaps.
snapping for you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Nani.
This is probably one of my earliest memories of immigration. And I remember when we were about to immigrate, a lot of my relatives would be like, oh my God, it's going to be freezing in America. It's going to be so cold. You should buy several jackets. And mind you, we're moving to Los Angeles, and that was cold already. Right? And I remember I had a cousin who came to visit us once from the Philippines, and he's like, man, it's so great here. America has air conditioners outside the door, like outside in the wild. You guys have air conditioning because it was so cold. And so I kind of took that memory of this emphasis of America being cold and nice. It's a paradise. You don't have to pay for AC and blah, 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 into a frozen kind of wasteland that's kind of hostile, actually, and not so nice to immigrants. And it could actually be really hard for immigrants. And that's kind of pictured in that bus scene, which I actually describe more in detail in my author's note. That was the first kind of, I was like not a good speaker when I was a kid. I was very choppy in my sentences, and this was kind of the first phrase that I said in full to my parents and to my aunt who all immigrated here with me was "Hirap buhay Amerika." That was my first phrase, my first sentence, and that's really telling of how I saw my parents struggle and how I felt that struggle even though I was a kid, and how I struggled as a kid. Even if it was just running from the bus at 5 a.m. just so my aunt could get to her caregiver job and her third caregiver job, and not having caregivers to take care of me and having to go along with them in their work. So that's kind of like the more personal poems that I really tried to be as relatable to people, with the calling card and that image of your family calling back home and you're catching up and they're like, oh, how are you doing? I bet it's a paradise there, it's great there, and you kind of just have to like bite your tongue and say, yeah, it's going well, even though it may not be as what you imagined. So
Yeah, I love how you kind of switch the narrative, I guess. And I think when a lot of us talk to our families, the older generations in our families, if we're not first gen, about why they came to America. It's always some kind of semblance of the story of for a better life or better opportunity, or, you know, life is better over here. And I like how you kind of switch that up. And as a kid, from a very young age, you noticed like life was actually fun in the Philippines. Like I could live and let go and be free. And sure, there wasn't, you know, air conditioned buses or freezers full of food, you know, in the house for tomorrow. But in other ways, like it was so much easier there, and life is actually hard over here. But I can't admit that, or I can't express that, because then it might make me, you know, maybe ungrateful or something for the opportunity that I'm supposed to be finding here, or have access to here. So I like that kind of flip that you made. And also, again, just the visuals that I get of like a young kid at the bus stop, blowing air, you know, in the cold, and just being so fascinated by it, because again, that's such a simple concept that I think we can all grasp, and a great starting place for introducing that narrative of a young first gen immigrant child learning to navigate America from coming from the Philippines.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, the Clouds of Frozen Breath was actually inspired by my mom. She said that the only time that she saw her breath was when she went to Baguio in the Philippines, which is the mountains. In the Philippines.
Yeah.
And my dad would say like, "Oh yeah, me too. I would blow air and, you know, blow my breath, and it would be foggy, and he would get a plastic bag and try to catch it and like save it for home."
Oh.
So yeah.
Yeah, as I was listening to you reading your poem, Justine, it got me to think like, wow, the cost of immigration, right? Like, it's like you are pursuing this American dream and you're there, and it's not really turning out the way you thought it was going to be, but you got to keep saying, wow, it's so much better here, isn't it? So much better here. But then you kind of feel like at the same time you're like crumbling inside, you know, but you're telling yourself, it's like, oh, if I tell myself enough, if I do enough of this life, it will be better. And you got, you know, you have to like kind of speak it into existence, but you're still kind of crumbling inside regardless, you know, and you have to make it work because of all the sacrifices it took to come to America. Right. So I feel that, I guess, inner conflict and that turmoil inside, in hearing you share your poem. So thank you.
Yeah, I think that inner conflict is so present in many of our Filipino immigrants, our first generation immigrants here, like my
Oh yeah.
parents, and you know, because we have a responsibility at home and this kind of privilege of being able to get a visa and come here and wanting to enjoy it,
Mhm.
but you know, and feeling guilty that we're not.
Yeah.
So yeah.
I
Yeah.
just feel like inner conflict is a big thing. Anyway, Ashley, sorry.
Oh, I was just gonna, touch on inner conflict as well. Yeah, I really like that poem, Justine. Especially, just your description of the Metro bus, because it's something I see all the time. And so, it's just it's something to really consider when you think about the immigrant experience, and like how precious time is, and like how sometimes you can't have that time for your family or your friends like you would probably back home, because you need to work and like keep up almost a facade, right? And so it just made me think like I don't really have that experience for myself in my personal life. So thank you for sharing. But it also made me think of just, you know, when so many of us, first generation college, at least, like going to college for the first time, or the first one in your family to go to college, like I remember like my family member would tell me like, wow, it's like such a privilege, like to be at university, to dorm at a university, to have the chance of getting a bachelor degree. I couldn't tell him that, like, like there would be days my first year where I just like laid in bed all day because I didn't know what else to do with myself, because like it was just so hard. Not hard and like not in the relatable sense that like hard work and everything, and like not trying to compete or like oppression Olympics on that sense, but like hard in terms of it's just not something that you're used to, that you're being challenged in ways that you've never been challenged before, and like seeing yourself in different ways that you've never seen yourself before. And so you have to keep up a facade that yeah, I made it, and like I get to do everything that you didn't get to do because you wanted me to, but like at what cost to like my mental and emotional health and like ability to perform.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
There's so many different struggles that we go through as as Filipinos living in America and as Filipinos living in the Philippines. And I think that gets into conflict a lot because a lot of Filipino Americans are kind of criticized for being kind of naive in their privilege. But it's, again, not the oppression Olympics, right? But recognizing that we all struggle in different ways and how the context and our environment influences that. And the pressure that we feel to like live up to our family's expectations because of their sacrifice for us.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's maybe the underlying theme that I took away from your poem is kind of that expectation of making the most of their sacrifice, even if it's at the cost of your own mental health or circumstance in any other way.
Yeah. Okay, so thanks for sharing, Justine. I'm going to share a poem of mine that is, again, very short. But just for like context, like I was born in Los Angeles. I lived here my entire life. My parents migrated here at a very young age, so I didn't really grow up with a lot of like the stories of like, older Filipino parents that are like really strict. My parents are very different from that. And it's one of the things I love about, my life and how I've grown up. But anyway, that's a side thing. But just to say that I was born in the US. And so this is like, this poem is a very general sentiment. I think a lot of just white people feel in general when it comes to navigating like other individuals. So it's titled Enemy of the Nation. A white woman said I was a disgrace to the Philippine nation because I couldn't speak Tagalog to her dog. Yeah, so I was at LAX. I came back from Hawaii with my family. And I saw this lady and she had the cutest dog ever. And I was with my little brother and like we were petting the dog. And then she asked me, and I've never actually been confronted with this question before. So it was like, a surprise to me was, where are you from? No, where are you really from game? And I was like, I'm from Los Angeles. And then she's like, where are you really from? And I was like, my parents are from the Philippines. And so she just blatantly asked me, she's like, oh, can you speak Tagalog? Like that. And I was like, no, like I can mostly understand. And, just to preface on that, I know that's also a whole conversation about Filipino Americans not being able to speak like any of the Filipino languages. And for me personally, like my parents tried, but then I started learning English and that just kind of, eased out. But I watched like a lot of Filipino and shows and things. And like, that's how I like was able to understand. But yeah, that doesn't negate anyone's identity, by the way. So she asked me if I knew how to speak Tagalog. And she was like, and I told her no. And she's like, wow, you should be ashamed of yourself. Like, you're a disgrace. And I was like, dude, I just wanted to pet your dog. And so it was one of those things where I was like, well, where does like, what am I if I'm not Filipino enough for even like this white woman who's like saying that I should be ashamed of myself.
Or her dog. Yeah.
Or her dog, It was a cute dog too. So it's kind of heartbreaking.
Yeah. I was just listening to another podcast about or told by a Chinese American who was basically talking about this idea again of the melting pot and how the U.S. Her words were the U.S. is kind of a graveyard for other cultures' languages, and I think that we touched on it earlier about in the Philippines. Even the main language that's taught is English. They teach you A is for apple, and they don't even have apples over there. So, what does that say to you? And it's no wonder. I think a lot of us feel guilty, or our sense of identity is kind of gauged by our ability to speak the language. And yet so many of us can't, even, not just our generation, but like our parents, in my family, like my grandparents' generation, it stopped there. And they very intentionally, after coming over here, did not pass it down to my dad and my aunties and my uncles, for the specific reason of they didn't want them to have those communication struggles as they were growing up and, you know, entering into corporate America and looking for professional opportunities. My grandpa used to always tell me when I would ask him as a little girl, why won't you teach me how to speak? He would say, because I don't want you to have an accent. And I'm like, well, I don't think I'm going to develop an accent. I just want to learn to speak the language. English is still my first language, obviously. But it was something that he held on to so tightly that like there was just nothing I could say to convince him to do otherwise. And so, you know, now he's gone, my grandma is gone, most of their siblings have passed on as well. And now we're left with a huge family nonetheless, but one that can't really speak. So how Filipino are we, you know?
Mm-hmm. And you know, it's interesting. I met someone actually a few years ago, and she was born in the Philippines. She's raised there. She's like from the Philippines basically, and she asked me if I could speak, and I told her no, I could mostly just understand. And then she admitted to me, she's like, yeah, the first language I learned was English. Like my parents never taught me Tagalog. And even though she was in the Philippines, and I was like, oh, but you know it. And she's like, yeah, of course. Like, how am I supposed to get around, you know, Manila and everything? And so, but she's telling me like, yeah, it just doesn't make any sense though, because it's not like I'm going to use it in business or anything. And it was just like, wow, that's really interesting. I think like,
yeah, like that's not the only thing that language is good for, you know, like it's also a huge part of preserving our culture and being able to pass it on as well. And so again, to kind of consider language as your gauge for like how Filipino are you is a really interesting conversation for me. And I think I like to also observe other Asian American cultures, not even Asian American, but any hyphenated American culture that also kind of judges each other based on their ability to speak the language and their kind of internal feeling when someone asks you that, to give that little hyphen or give that little footnote of, oh, but I can understand it, you know, to like try and get as close as you can, I guess, in a sense, to being able to speak.
Yeah. So I can speak Tagalog because that was my parents' way of surviving America, was to retain the culture that they had and to thrive on those traditions and practices. But what I found is that a lot of first generation immigrants, you know, parents and older adults who immigrated here don't teach their kids the language because that's their own way of survival, right? Because they have faced discrimination. They have been ridiculed for accents. They have struggled to write and speak English and, you know, need translators and need to call their niece or nephew to kind of gauge what they're saying, right? So that was their way of survival, is assimilation and having their kids assimilate so they don't have to feel the pain and struggle that they did, right? And that was a conversation I had with someone also from the Philippines, born and raised there, but very critical of Filipino Americans who did not speak the language, did not know anything about Filipino history, did not advocate for, you know, Filipino injustices, and were not informed of like the happenings in the Philippines and such. And but she was like, "Oh, not you, because you know you're obviously informed and blah blah blah." But I was like, "Wait, hold on there. You have to think about the resources that we're given. A lot of Filipino Americans are given here. The availability of Filipino history here in America, the survival component that a lot of Filipino immigrants have gone through and passed on to their children, and the discrimination and racism and kind of ridicule that a lot of Filipinos face here for being connected to their culture. And again, it's all about context. In the Philippines, yes, there's colorism. There are a lot of problems in the Philippines. Don't get me wrong. But problems specifically rooted in white supremacy and racism is so specific to hyphenated Americans. If we're talking in the context of being Filipino, our struggle for identity is rooted in that. And so when people trash on Filipino Americans for not being Filipino enough, man, it gets me so riled up because we're faced with all these institutional barriers that are not available to us unless, you have parents like mine who wanted to hold on to their culture. But again, there are many parents who were like, that is very traumatizing and I don't want to pass that on to my child. And, kind of like your grandpa, Nani, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, no, that is, I appreciate you expanding on that because that is what I was told from my uncles and my dad, kind of at the heart of his, why he felt so strongly about that, because he was in the Navy and he was teased for having an accent. And so he held on to that and he told, my dad and his brothers and then me and my cousins, I don't want you to have an accent. I don't want you to have an accent. And we're just like, why do you care about accents? Like, what's so bad about having an accent? Even though, we may or may not develop one just because we learn a different language. And, obviously it came from, like you were explaining, his own experience and the survival mindset that he developed because of it, which obviously a concept I wasn't able to grasp until later in life after he was gone and I can no longer, have that conversation with him. So I again appreciate resources like your guys' books that kind of put you in their shoes for a moment and give you a taste of, why they felt the way that they did.
Yeah, and then it's not and on like the other, like, I guess, sub branch of like survival, maybe it's not like, for me it's not necessarily like because they don't want to, they just didn't have time to, like they were just working all the time, or had other priorities like putting food on the table, or like just living life and like trying to enjoy the fruits of their labor, that it was like, there's not really a time or an effort. And like sometimes like I talk to my mom in Tagalog, but it's more for fun, because now at this point she's just like, I give up, and I'm like, I tried. So sometimes it's, when you do have the time, it's not too late, but it doesn't feel as a priority as much as it used to.
Yeah, I want to add to the conversation when I think about learning Tagalog. Like technically, I'm supposed to know 3 different dialects because my parents are from different regions, and for me, there was a point, and I remember it very clearly. It was back in 2018. My grandma had passed away, and it was one of my last family trips to the Philippines. And I talk about this quite often on the Tifa Project, but I mean, you know what? Y'all just listen to TV Project if you want to know why. But the point is that I had a very traumatic experience. I had a number of traumatic experiences within my own family whenever I came back to the Philippines. That the final time I decided to kind of share, even with my own mom, like what I was going through every time we went to the Philippines, she actually blamed me for it. She's like, "Well, why? Like what did you do? Why, it's essentially, she said it was my fault for the things that was happening." And I remember at that time that was a tipping point for me to be like, I want nothing to do with my family at this point. If this is what family is, if family is abuse, if it's minimizing, if it's, if it's all these negative emotions, like I think I need to redefine what family means for myself. And part of that was because often I would even hear my relatives say like, "Oh, I wish you could speak Tagalog or, the other dialects so that I can actually have like a more cohesive conversation with you." But like in 2008, I remember making this deep vow to myself. Like I told myself, like, when I'm back in America, like I am done with a lot of my family members. And part of that was deliberately not learning. Like I mean, I could have had that chance. I was like, I do not want to learn. I refuse to learn. And I really wanted to disconnect myself from my family in that sense. And so I think like when people ask, like, or when people say those kind of comments, like, "Oh, you don't speak Tagalog, like shame on you," or whatever, it's like I kind of wish that those people would rather than say like, how dare you, or that sucks, or that's awful, because even in our own community, at the beginning when I first started the Tifa Project, I think back at the beginning of 2017, another Filipina, when I said I couldn't speak it, she was like, "Oh, you can't speak it? That's too bad." Like even in our own community, you get, shamed for not knowing your language. And I want to, I wish that people can maybe say something differently instead. Say like, "Oh, that's interesting. Tell me your story. How is it that you like how is that? Where does that come from for you to not know, that? Or why do you prefer, let's say, English over whatever dialect? And I kind of hope in having this conversation we can change the dialogue rather than shaming us, to be curious, be like, oh, that's interesting. Like, so tell me about your environment, tell me about your upbringing, rather than saying, where are you from, right? Like, I think that if we could find that verbiage to, or at least other people can find that verbiage to talk to us differently, rather than the typical way of, where are you from? Where are you really from? Oh, you don't speak Tagalog? Like, you're not Filipino. Like, if we can somehow, put that out there for other people to change that language, I think it'll open up for better dialogue, in my opinion.
And I wonder like how much it's also like, I mean, that's a great point, Jen. And I was just thinking like how much it's also like who you're talking to, because I've also heard comments where, someone Filipino criticizes another Filipino for their accent, or for not knowing English well enough, for not, sounding, American enough. And so it's kind of like a weird flip where it's like, why do you know, like, why is like the Tagalog so influencing your speaking? And so it's just interesting as to like, is it a generational thing? Is it like, what's the background here?
Yeah, I think that's an interesting thing that made me think about another Chismes with Jen and Nani session that we are going to come out with at some point in the near future, where we are doing a commentary on the Trece series, the Netflix series Trece, and how we were critiquing Shay Mitchell's voice acting skills in that show, and talking about how the consensus that we've seen online, or talk to other people about, is that she didn't sound Filipino enough. And so I think it's so interesting. This conversation about language, again, is just so interesting in how we use it as a gauge to judge, I guess, how Filipino someone is, and whether we're coming, the standpoint that we're coming from, like, oh, you're more Filipino if you do have that kind of cultural intonation to your voice, versus, the American side of it is like, oh, you can't be American enough if you can't, or an American can tell you you're not Filipino enough if you can't speak Tagalog to my dog, So it's just an interesting conversation.
Tress
I
is a
wanted to
whole.
add one more thing. Oh yeah, sorry. I want to add again about context, because in the Philippines, in Manila specifically, there's this dialect that's arise because of schools forcing kids to learn English first, called Konyo, right? And it's like Taglish almost. Like, it's very much a mix of Tagalog, but mainly English, and there's like an accent like tied to it, and a lot of people sometimes desire that accent because it means you're a little bit more upper class and educated, and you live in the city, and you're, in the finer things of life. But then there's some people who are like, well, you're not really authentic, and you're trying to be someone you're not, so it's interesting how our language, which has already been stripped, right, because of Spanish colonization, and all the colonizations, is still being critiqued and evolving throughout time, and how we, as Filipinos, our community is one of the biggest like influencers of that, of like what is the most acceptable accent,
Yeah, I feel like this is a whole conversation
Absolutely.
for another time. But, for everyone who's been here so far and joining us live, first of all, thank you so much for being here. And comment, like, let us know, like, what your take is on language, and is it a gauge to judge people or not, right? And so, but again, I just want to acknowledge our live people joining us today, and thank you all so much for being here. All right, Ashley, I'm kind of like managing the chat, so I'm gonna turn it back to you.
Oh, I just want to check in on time.
Well, I mean, that's up to y'all. We can end now. Like,
Oh.
I mean, is everyone okay? Like, I know that you had an agenda that you wanted to go through. Where are we almost done with it, or like, where are we at with that?
Well, Justine, like, if you also you want to cut to our last two, I think for you it's going to start with Mutt. and then we can just go from there.
Yeah, we can start with
Yeah.
Let me pull it up.
Yeah, this will be a great way to wrap up, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we got a good like 90 minutes today, and I feel really grateful for both of you and your time, and to be here to share a piece of your book. And I hope that our viewers today and those who watch the replay will purchase your book and support you and continue to amplify our stories and history and art, essentially. So anyway,
Yeah.
I think it's good if we'll just like read through. We'll just read through and then talk.
Yeah.
To finish. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So this is the first poem of my last chapter in Identity. Mutt. The middle school boy says, Chinese? Japanese? Last name sounds Hispanic. Are you Mexican? Spanish? Are you from the islands, like the people who live in huts? Or are you all of the above, like some kind of mutt? He smiles, then barks. Goosebumps crawl up my neck like angry red ants. Fists clamp so tight my knuckles form snow caps. If one more microaggression lands on the pile of insults on my shoulders, an avalanche will come crashing down my chest. My heart will sink into freezing cold waters and overflow into lakes in my eyes. He barks again. You're an inbred. My feet are glued onto glaciers, tongue still caught in frostbite and voice still lost in Arctic fog. I cannot surrender to the cold. So I release my fist and melt my snow-capped knuckles. I pat down the snow piled onto my chest like wet sand, play lifeguard, and carry my heart out the water, desperately blowing back life into its withered walls and torn heartstrings. Bark at me, mutt. I have always let my rage turn into tears, then loneliness, and finally silence. The boy walks away and laughs, still barking. My voice, still lost. Lips, still frozen. So instead of barking or biting, I try to repaint the warm landscape of home in this deserted iceberg land, blank, white, cold. I try to conjure watercolor memories of tropical islands, but even those were lost somewhere in the snowstorm or tossed into mounds of hail. So I wait for the day the snow melts into the Philippine Sea. And when this day comes, perhaps my masterpiece won't have to be painted in shades of distant memories.
Okay, so my poem's called Present. I shove spoonfuls of rice into my mouth, starving for my truth. I play with the grain between my teeth, toying with identity, balancing on the precarious middle of how much is enough, and if I'm full or if my hunger persists. Contemplating where I stand now that one flag was buried in memory. But those memories still burst with color like a mountain sunrise, gold and gleaming and bright and real. But those memories live within me like the gradient of sunset on beach, dimming and wavering and sprinting away. For what can I claim when the family influence walked out the door? Now all I consume is language and food and a handful of friends I still stick by, the identity of my self-constructed Filipino, Latino, American hybrid before this journey into Filipino-ness. Can that still be who I am? I swallow the grain of rice like a Dayquil pill, dry against my throat and stuck at the opening. A hard pill to swallow is knowing that I can now only wave 2 flags instead of 3.
And this last poem is Halo Halo, which is the namesake of my book, and the last poem in my book. To the boy who called me a mutt, I think you mean to say, I am a concoction of all things sweet and familiar. I'm the satisfying crunch of ice at the bottom of your cup and the mush of mungo beans shoveled under the ashes Japanese imperialism left behind. Where there was fire, there were also hills of snowflakes, soaked in splashes of canned milk, cooling the sticky sweat sizzling under the Philippine sun. I am soft and green gulaman, harvested from the oceans that the Spanish and the Americans ripped apart like how they ripped all of us apart like threads of jackfruit, lost and drowning in murky waters, using minatamis na saging as lifesavers. They struggle to keep afloat. I struggle to save these threads and give them a warm home, but Lechiflan gets in the way. Lechiflan slumps softly atop and thinks it's still siesta in Barcelona, so there he stays afloat on the beautiful Ube Halaya. She's grown from the rich soil my ancestors toiled and watered, harvested with strong hands and sweet smiles. Even when she is sliced apart, she only reveals love and a purple heart. But now, she carries the weight of the colonial world sinking, sinking, sinking down, navigating through this confusing cup and occasionally giving ube ice cream a kiss on the cheek, reminding her of the roots that make her whole. To the boy who called me a mutt, my layers and flavors are too rich for you to swallow. You might find me confusing, but my culture is a sweet delicacy that your taste buds cannot afford. I am not your grandmother's apple pie or your father's root beer float. I am a dynamic mix of history, mix of ancestry, mix of survival, mix of power, mix of revolution, mix of justice, and yes, I am still figuring out the mix of things in this cultural halo halo. And you can call me a mutt, an inbred, a disaster, a mudblood, but I have felt the rich soil my ancestors toiled and watered in my palms. I have felt the strong hands and sweet smiles that keep me rooted in my homeland. And even when you slice me apart, I will only show love and a purple heart. I will still carry the weight of this colonial world, but I rise, rise, rise with my people who, in all of their halo halo layers, are fully, wholly, and unapologetically Filipinx. Thank you.
I'm so hungry now. But also
I
empowered.
was just gonna say I want some hello hello.
So hot, LA. So this last poem is the last one of my book as well. And so the book is like kind of a letter to my lolo, my grandpa, and it's titled To Lolocon because I combined his name with Lolo to make Lolocon. His name is Conrad Doe. So To Lolocon. I wish I could show you Manhattan skylines at sunset. I wish I could show you Parisian lights at midnight. I wish I could show you Belgian waffles, Italian catacombs, Spanish villas, Greek Parthenons. But your tired bones are unable to tread on cobblestone. Bones worn by years of work, only amounting to ominous medical bills. But to me, your days represent a chain reaction of sacrifice, all for posterity's better life. So all I can do is tell you who I am becoming, the words unable to truly paint every color, to prickle your skin like every evening breeze. All I can do is show you the fruits of your labor through shitty Wi-Fi on tiny telephone screens. But through the pixelated blur and lagging buffer, I see sweetness and tenderness in 32 chiclets made of acrylic resin and metal, and I know I've made you proud. Love, Ashley. So that's our show for today. If you guys, Jen and Nani, want to jump in here.
Yeah, no, I appreciate how both of your works just like flow with each other, and you guys are able to be so fluid. I know that you wrote your books around the same time, but obviously didn't collaborate on them together. So I think it's really special that you're able to bounce off of each other's work in that way, just first and foremost, and kudos to both of you as artists and poets. Job well done. I think that the two last poems that you shared, Justine, were two of my favorites from your book, and something that, really resonated with me personally, the whole mutt thing. There are like several members in my family who, as I was growing up, would refer to me as a mutt when I would be, having those questionings of identity and asking them like, what am I? What am I? Oh, you're a mutt. You are a mixture of a lot of things. And I love how you brought it back in the end, draw the parallel to Halo Halo, and how that's also a mixture of all these different cultures, even though it's very much a signature Filipino dessert. And that's what we are. We're a mix of a whole bunch of different cultures because of a dark and ugly history. And so that was just really well put together. And then Ashley, for your last poem, it really reminded me also of my relationship with my grandpa and how I struggled so much to kind of make him proud in the ways earlier on that that I interpreted I was supposed to be upholding a Filipino identity, and then later on, what I knew to be, prickling his skin, as you say, and so how I was able or not able to communicate to him over the years, but tried nonetheless, and still showed up and answered the phone and had those conversations with him that were, repetitive and just kind of, I don't know the word that I'm looking for, but just kind of telling him what he wants to hear in a sense. So yeah, I appreciated just the personal connection that I felt with both of your endings here.
Yeah, to me, the way that I heard both of your both of you and your poems, I heard what's the word I'm trying to look for? I feel like this is outdated, but let me just say it. I heard swag. I heard like attitude. Like you cannot understand this richness. Like you can't fathom, like how amazing it is to be me. Okay, like you are missing out. That's what I was thinking of. Was just that swag, that posture of like you're missing out, and then also to Ashley, just your final poem. It just reminded me of love. At the end of the day, like a lot of our struggle, I think, has a lot to do with still seeking that approval and validation from our loved ones, right? Kind of like, I hope that I made you proud, or I hope that, in what I did, it made you like it. I hope that you saw a little bit of yourself in me, because of what I did and how I stepped out into the world and what I'm telling you,
Mhm.
and as much as even for I speak on myself, really like that inner conflict of that, trying to have that closeness with family, but also that distance and just this, mixed feelings of it all. It's at the end of the day, like we want that acceptance, we want that love from our family. But I can't thank you both enough for doing this with us today. And Ashley, thank you for facilitating, and thank you for just dealing with me trying to not facilitate.
You're an
But
amazing facilitator, Jen. It was my pleasure.
Very natural. Yeah.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. No, it's I love doing it. I remember I had a friend that was like, "Oh, how is it that you like love moderating and hosting and stuff?" And for me, it's like it's my one place where I could really help everyone feel heard and give people a space to speak, And I love it. I get a kick out of it. So anyway, we'll go ahead and wrap up here, but I just want to check in with both of you first. Justine, I'm starting with you. Any closing thoughts to our viewers?
Yeah, I'm so grateful for all of y'all. I saw a lot of familiar names, and Justine, like Vanessa, awesome. Like I love you all. You've always been there for me. And to you lovely ladies, thank you for inspiring me, empowering me, and just supporting me throughout this whole journey, this whole crazy journey that we've had. So yeah.
Yeah. Well, you're stuck with us. So we're going to be supporting each other for as long as we live. And I said that
Yay.
live, so now I have to. Ashley, any closing thoughts from you?
Yeah, I was really happy, when you guys reached out because my episode was about a year ago. So,
Yeah.
and I still kind of kept in touch. But, I really appreciate just the time and the effort put in tonight and just, being able to perform with Justine and like continue to like promote her book. And coming from somebody who's like an editor of, the company that we work that published us, and it's just like really great to see, the feedback and the excitement around her book and just this collective place where we are of like learning and interacting with each other and just connecting. Like I really enjoyed having these conversations about like language and it's just amazing to see like how very different everyone's experiences are, and that we still need to appreciate it even if it's not our experiences. It's still valid, right? And so thank you so much, and thank you for everyone to watching and commenting.
Yeah. And of course, Nani, thank you for being with us here still. To be a part of I always joke about that because I don't know when Hero is going to come along. But,
Yes. None of us
thank you for
know. He will let us know. But yes, no, thank you for having me. And I just appreciate the collaborative effort that it took to put on this event. And, I think Jen and I, again, our purpose with this new platform for our membership is to house a container for resources like yours to be shared, be highlighted, and really dove into, not just sending a link or saying a name of a book, but actually opening up the book and reading some of it and diving into its content. And so you both deserve to be celebrated in that way. And I hope that you have found that here on this platform. We love you.
Yeah,
We love you.
We love you. And of course, to our viewers, I want to make sure I bring up a couple of comments that I didn't mention throughout. But Vanessa, and this is our talk earlier about, talking about different parts of America. She said, story of my life growing up in the South. And then Larissa from our YouTube channel watching in says, intersectionality is definitely an important conversation. Thank you for sharing. And Leia, who just popped in, says, hello, just got home from work. Great to see you all, ladies. Leia, we love you. Thank you for hopping on for the last 2 minutes of
Yes,
our show.
we hope you had a great day at work.
Yeah, we hope you had a great day. And, this episode will be available. The replay will be available publicly for a limited time. So feel free to watch the replay, share this with your friends. And remember, if you want to support our show and support Filipina-led media, check us out at biasboba.com. And of course, just as a reminder, you can reach out to Justine on Instagram. Here are her IG handles. Pause this so you can look it up. And then also with Ashley, here's her IG handle as well. And you've seen our contact information at the bottom this entire time, so I don't have to say it like all out loud. But we love you all. Have a wonderful rest of the evening and a great weekend ahead. And we'll chat with y'all soon. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.